through the prism of being a dad of 3 young children, and I'm married to a MAHA mom. My wife, Katie, is the one who deserves all the credit for educating me about this issue on the birth of our children. But I first want to just take a moment for us to think about how extraordinary this moment is, that Bobby's sitting there right now, not as a private citizen, not as the leader of a nonprofit, but as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, right, behind government seal, issuing, this is a government report, right? His whole life, Bobby has issued private reports, held private press conferences, engaged in private advocacy. And after generations of all of that work, his life's work now has a government seal on it. Think about how remarkable that is. Yes. When I say that I think about these issues primarily as a dad, and I was shocked to learn, again, mostly, if not exclusively with my wife's help, on the birth of our children, just how filled our whole world is with toxins, and how bereft a child's world is of all of the natural things that humans have interacted with and encountered since the beginning of humanity. We're still a natural being. Humans are still natural creatures. It affects your health if a child goes through its formative years, his or her formative years, without access to enough sunlight every day, enough exercise every day, to the microorganisms that exist in the world, in dirt and in trees and in leaves and all of the things that humans have interacted with. Now, a child that grows up in a world where the only things that child consumes are ultra-processed foods, baby food that is filled with sugar and preservatives. The toxins are in our environment. Even in a mother's breast milk, we find, and it's in this report, right, we find traces of toxic chemicals because of what is in our environment, where that child is exposed from the moment they're born, everything they touch and interact with industrial chemicals, right? They're chemicals in the carpets in our homes, in the treatments in our yards, in our foods, cleaning products. I mean, think about any of you who's had a newborn. Think about how gentle and precious a newborn baby is, and the kinds of chemicals that they're exposed to from the day they're born, and what they're not exposed to, that they need to have I think the term is a microbiome, that you need to develop a proper immune system. And then all of these parents, racked with anguish when they find out that their kid has an immune disorder, or a lifelong allergy, or a lifelong skin disorder. And that may not seem like a very stressful thing until you have a kid yourself. And so for parents, for example, whose kids have chronic eczema, right? That may not sound, that's a health crisis. It is a crisis for that family. It's a crisis for that family as they search every single day to find that cream or that lotion or that medication that's going to give that child some relief. And it's not normal. It's just fundamentally not normal for children to have any disease at all. Children are to be the healthiest among us. And of course, the most heartbreaking part of it, of course, is the pediatric cancer. There's no other primate in the world where pediatric cancer is commonplace. Only in humans. Why is that? Why do humans alone have children who are afflicted with these heartbreaking, life-threatening illnesses? And what's fascinating, and this is something that's not disputed, is that vastly lower rates of pediatric cancer in the developing world than the developed world. It is a disease of civilization. And think about that. And they find that when someone moves from the developing world to the developed world, within one generation, so their children, they have the exact same cancer rates as the existing population in the United States or other Western countries. So what is happening in our environment, in our food supply, in our lives, in our medical protocols that is causing us to be so sick? And when I grew up in the 90s mostly, I'm born in the 80s, but mostly grew up in the 90s, it was commonplace, for example, and this is still commonplace, but for every young boy that I knew who was deemed to be too energetic, they were put on Ritalin. I mean, think about that culture that we had, and still do as a country, where perfectly healthy young boys, and I knew them, they had no behavioral issues. I never saw them act out in a violent way or disruptive way. But if they were simply too energetic in class, too happy in class, too excited in class, the teacher would call the parent, they would have a parent-teacher conference, and they would put that kid on drugs. And we've had that culture for decades in the society. And then we're surprised we have all this chronic illness, that we're surprised that we have all these chronic health problems as a country. So I could keep going. It's all in this report. But the bottom line here is that what Secretary Kennedy has done under the direction and leadership of President Trump is, for the first time in American history, the full power and authority of the federal government is being used to identify and solve the chronic disease epidemic and not to cover it up. So thank you very much. An honor to serve with you.